Hello, how you doing? It's Phil Thach, and I am here with another Viltrox lens for APS-c cameras. They sent me this lens and asked me to take a look at it, and I'm happy to do so. The first one that I tried out was the 23mm f1.4 autofocus lens for Nikon Z mount APS-c cameras like the ZFC and the Z50. And now I'm going to take a look at the 33mm f1.4, and 33 millimeters is kind of gives you right at almost exactly 50 millimeters full frame equivalent. So this is kind of a nifty 50 replacement. And there are three of these Viltrox lenses for APS-c. There's the 23, the 33, and then there's a 56. And the 33 is the least expensive of the three. I had to change locations. Where I was before, there was a man running a huge leaf blower. So now I'm in a new spot, and let's take a look at this lens. The packaging is virtually identical to the 23mm that I've already taken a look at. And man, I really enjoyed that lens, and especially I enjoyed it for video. But this focal length might be more of what I'd be looking for photography. So let's see, inside the box there's some literature, more literature, a nice little pouch, silica gel. Oh, there's what we're looking for. They package these things really well. Almost like a product from Apple. And we've got a nice metal lens hood. Is it the exact same one? Yes. Look how similar these two lenses are in size. It's pretty close. Kind of might mix them up in your bag. They say they have the same 52mm filter thread on the front, and they have the same, let's see, it is a clickless aperture with an A on the end. So if you put this on the A, and this is how I'll operate it on my camera, I'll put this on the A, and there is a click, and I failed to mention this when I was talking about the 23. There is a click between F16 and the A, and once you put it on A, then you can control the aperture from the camera instead of on the aperture dial, which is the way I prefer to do it. And wow, that manual focus override ring, just like on the 23, feels fantastic. So I am going to get this lens out and work with it over the next week or two, and take you along with me and see what it's all about. But so far, it feels great. I was mistaken a moment ago when I said the lens hoods were exactly the same. The one that came with the 33 is slightly larger than the one that came with the 23. Both of them are made of metal. The aperture blades on this lens have a really cool look to them when you have them stopped down to f16. So I thought I would take an up-close picture and show them to you, because I think they're really cool looking, and I've even had people comment, wow, look at the aperture blades on that lens. Okay, so right there while I was at the picnic table, I went ahead and put the 33mm f1.4 Viltrox lens on my ZFC, and I made this photograph at 1.4 of my Nikon Z50 with the 23mm Viltrox lens on it at 1.4, and you can see there is beautiful out of focus quality. It just looks really nice, but if you look close, you can see in the really high contrast areas at 1.4, there is a pretty good bit of chromatic aberration right here. I think my focus point is the K, and the K looks pretty good, but the N has one color of chromatic aberration, and the other N that's out of focus on the other side has another color of chromatic aberration. So if we go into the develop module, and this is a straight out of camera raw, hasn't been edited at all, we can go down here and we can see that Lightroom does have a profile for the Viltrox Autofocus 33 1.4Z, and I have remove chromatic aberration checked, and it's not really doing that much. If I enable profile corrections, you can see where it's getting rid of a little bit of vignetting, not much. So let's try manual. Let's try to get rid of the chromatic aberration manually. That was a little better. It helps it a little, but really not that much. Let's reset. It really doesn't help it that much. Now, the good news is this is only when you're at 1.4 and you're making a photograph of something with a lot of contrast, like this white against black. I was alerted that my buddy David was in Chattanooga and was hungry, and I said, hey man, let's eat. So I went down and met David and we ate, and I took this picture of David's awesome Leica camera with this 50mm f2, and similarly you can see the same thing. We've got some chromatic aberration on that high contrast area, but remember, that's only if you're shooting at f1.4. If you stop it down to 2.8 or 5.6, something like that, that goes away, and it's only on high contrast areas. So David and I, we went for kind of a little photo walk around downtown Chattanooga, and I took this picture of David at f1.4. You can see 33 millimeters, ISO 200, 1/4000th of a second, and I just used the medium speed with the Nikon Z FC, not the fastest frames per second and not the slowest. I used the medium, and I just pointed the camera at David and started to walk around him while pressing the focus button. And I was doing eye detect autofocus, and you can see this first photograph is nice and in focus, and I don't see any chromatic aberration anywhere, even though this is f1.4, and it's probably because this is not a high contrast scene like the black on white of the Nikon logo on my Z50. And I just walked around David and took pictures at a pretty fast drive mode. And you can see this picture might be a little bit out of focus. That might be motion blur, although maybe not at 1/4000th. Back to very sharp on that one. Nice and sharp on that one. Nice and sharp on that one. Nice and sharp on that one. David's like, what are you doing, Phil? Nice and sharp on that one. Nice and sharp on that one. Nice and sharp on that one. I think that one is sharp. That one, I've got some focus issues. That one's nice and sharp. That one's got some focus issues. And that one is nice and sharp. So of all these pictures, let's see how many it is. 14 pictures. I think 3 of them are not perfectly sharp. And you know, the Nikon autofocus system is not known for being super great in situations like that. So I think this Viltrox lens did as well with the Nikon autofocus system as any genuine Nikon lens would have done. And you can see also that the background is really nice, and it's getting David's eye really well in these shots, and I'm not seeing any chromatic aberration. So that is pretty good for portrait work at f1.4 in really harsh conditions of not taking my time, just walking around and pressing the button. So David and I walked around a little bit, and he was taking pictures of buildings. So I said, well, I'll do a little bit of that with you. And I stopped it down to f5.6 and made this photograph of this beautiful historic building in downtown Chattanooga. It was really cool to make that shot, and I thought it turned out really well. It's nice and sharp, plenty of depth of field at 5.6, came out really nice. Then I stopped the lens down to f16 and slowed my shutter speed down to 1/40th and decided I would try a panning blur. And I thought this first attempt at a panning blur with the Viltrox 33mm f1.4 turned out really nice. The car is very nice and sharp, and I've got a nice blur on this 1/40th of a second shot. Then we walked down to the McKenzie Arena, and we made some photographs of it, and I made this photograph of Gate 3 at 1.4. I probably should have stopped this down to 5.6 or 8 or something like that. But you know what? It came out just fine at f1.4. While I was experimenting with the lens, I came up here to Knoxville to have lunch with my daughter and her boyfriend. Heather and I came up here, and I made a number of pictures here at Calhoun's restaurant and other places on the Tennessee riverfront. So here we are goofing around in Knoxville, and we were in this elevator, or in this building that had an elevator right by the riverfront near the restaurant where we ate. And they took the elevator, and I ran down the stairs and waited to make this picture as the doors opened. And you can see this is just real quick shot, f1.4. My daughter is nice and in focus, and Ian and Heather slightly stepping back from her are not in focus as you would expect at f1.4. So that turned out nice. Now here is a portrait I made of my daughter just real quick there while we were visiting in Knoxville, and there were some bushes with some light trickling through. You know, it was super harsh light that day, so I had to find some shadowy areas to make these pictures, and you can see the bright light trickling through, and there's beautiful bokeh with this lens, and it is nice and sharp on my daughter's eye at 1/500th f1.4 and ISO 100. Here's some tulips that were coming up. I stopped the lens down to 2.8 and made a quick photograph of these tulips and you can see how harsh the light was. And at 2.8, the bokeh is a little bit messy in the background. 1.4, it's beautiful, and probably places in between 1.4 and 2.8, it's pretty beautiful. But right there, it's a little on the messy side, I think. This is inside the restaurant where we ate. We ate in kind of a foyer area, and I made this photograph of Heather at f1.4, and you can see her eye is nice and sharp, and the background is just beautifully bokeh-fied. And I handed the camera to my daughter and had her make this shot, taught her where the focus button was, and you can see it. I didn't have my head perfectly straight, so it focused on the near eye, and my near eye is sharp and the far eye is not sharp, and that's going to be normal for any really fast lens like a 1.4 or a 1.8. Even a 2.8 will have that sometimes, but it's nice and sharp, and the out of focus quality is good. Look, the back of my ear is completely out of focus. Really nice portrait lens, especially for the money. Okay, now we're going to try the Viltrox 33mm f1.4 for video. I've got it on my Nikon Z FC right now, doing some 24 frames per second video at f1.4. I'm just standing out here on my back porch. I just got home from work, and anytime I have a free moment over the week or so that I've been working on doing this review, I've tried to use this lens as much as possible. And like I say, I'm filming myself at f1.4. I really love this 23mm lens for video, and it looks like this 33mm version is going to be really nice for video as well. You can see that I appear to be, as I look at myself in the flip screen, I appear to be relatively sharp, and quality picture, and the background is completely out of focus, so there's great separation with this lens. And now let's see if I can do hold the product close to the lens test. It's important to put the product in front of your face before you put the product in front of the lens, or at least that's the way it is with most lenses I've tested. And if I don't do that, if I just stick the product up in front, the camera is still focusing on my face there in the background. So let's do it this way. Put the product right in front of my face and slowly bring it in. And yes, I think that is working. Again, this is the 23mm that I'm holding, and it's the 33mm that looks just like it that I'm testing. And now we'll move the product out of the way and watch it drift back into focus. Really love the way these Viltrox lenses perform for video on my Nikon Z FC. Heather and I came to Harrison Bay State Park, and I made some photographs inside Dockside Cafe with the Viltrox 33. While we were in the restaurant, I made 4 pictures of these salt and pepper shakers, and the first one I'm at f1.4, and you can see the background. Here is another shot at f1.8. Here we are at f2.8. And here we are at f5.6. You can see the background gets a lot closer. Now, here's something else. I started out at 1/100th of a second. So 1/100th f1.4 auto ISO lands me at 160. 1/100th f1.8 auto ISO lands me at 280. Now, when I stopped it down to 2.8, I slowed my shutter speed down to 1/100th, and it still brought the ISO all the way up to 1000, and I believe I stayed at 1/80th when I went to the 5.6 shot, and ISO goes all the way up to 3600. So you can see how having a 1.4 lens in a not brightly lit situation will really help you out on your ISO. Now, while we were in the restaurant, I made this photograph of Heather. This is a 1/80th f1.4 shot in her Braves hat. We made these, it was opening day of Major League Baseball season, and Heather was all decked out in her Braves stuff. So there you can see how sharp Heather's eyes are at f1.4. And I stopped it down to f2 and made this photograph of our fried pickles that we had as an appetizer. Don't they look delicious? Let me tell you, they were fantastic. And after we got done eating, we went outside and walked around on the boat docks a little bit. Here is another photograph of Heather at f1.4, and the eye detect autofocus did detect this eye, and because it's at 1.4, this eye is a little bit out of focus, but the eye that the focus focus point was on is in focus. If you want both eyes in focus, you probably need to stop down to 2.8. That's with any lens, not just this one. f1.4 has such a shallow depth of field. If you're this close and the eyes aren't on the same plane, one of them's going to be out of focus. Here we are at the gate that says, hey, you can't go over there and look at those boats, but I thought it was fun to make a picture here. This is a 1.4 shot of Heather, and I got Heather to make this photograph of me, f1.4, with the boat dock all the way across the way. Well, I've been working on this review for a week now. It's a week after I unboxed it. I've been using it every time I get a chance. And we're back at Harrison Bay State Park. This is right where I started. Heather and I are back at Harrison Bay State Park, and there's a bunch of deer down here in this field, and Heather just now made some photographs of the deer out the window with the 33. Now, this is nowhere near the focal length that you would need for a wildlife lens, but it was fun taking a kind of a wide shot of deer out the window of the car. This is the photograph that Heather made out the window of the car at f1.4, 1/4000th of a second. Now this is pretty highly cropped, but it is a deer photograph with the Viltrox 33, so how about that? This is a shot I made. There were a whole bunch of deer in the field, and I just kind of walked down there and got as close as I could before they scampered off, and I made this shot at 2.8 and 1/2000th of a second of the deer in the field. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in this shot, and I think there were 10 deer total, but not all of them in this shot. While we were at Harrison Bay State Park, Heather and I came and hiked around on this trail just a little bit, and we made some photos. And what were we using, Heather?
The Viltrox 33 f1.4. Awesome.
After that, we went on a little bit of a hike, and the sun was going down, and I made this horribly backlit photograph of Heather, just trying to be mean to the lens, and it did pretty well. I mean, there's some chromatic aberration in the background and some flaring, but I mean, you shouldn't shoot directly into the sun at f1.4. That's just crazy. And considering that, the photo turned out pretty good, I thought. Here's a portrait that Heather made of me, also at 1.4, and on the right-hand side of the screen where the trees are, there is some chromatic aberration over there that I wasn't all that happy with, but otherwise I thought this shot turned out real nice. And then this is a timer shot, and at f1.4 if you move 1 inch you're out of focus. So I focused on Heather, and then I set the timer and ran over there with the camera on a tripod, so we're not perfectly in focus, and that's not a fault of the lens. That's just technique on my part. Really, a shot like this probably should be at f4, but I did it at 1.4 because hey, I've got a 1.4 lens, why not? This is a demonstration of how close you can get when you're at minimum focus distance, and I used an SD card because everybody knows what size an SD card is, and this is not a macro lens, but I wish it could get a little bit closer than this. All in all, I'm pretty happy with this 33mm 1.4 from Viltrox for Nikon Z APS-C cameras. I'm just really happy with the results from it. I guess if I had to pick a complaint, it would be the minimum focus distance is not as close as I would like. I mean, this is not a macro lens, so it's not supposed to be super close, but I wish it was just a little bit closer than it is. And of course, as I demonstrated in the video, there is, if you're shooting wide open at a really high contrast black right next to white sort of a situation, there is some chromatic aberration. But in portraits, which is where you'd want to shoot at f1.4 to get some great out of focus backgrounds, I didn't see any chromatic aberration at all in those type shots. So it's not really a problem. Now, Nikon for Z, the only 35mm lens they have, it's for full frame. Of course, it'll work on APS-C, and it is a 1.8, and it costs a lot of money. I'm thinking, I don't have the number memorized, I'll put it on the screen, but I'm thinking it's about nearly 4 times as much as this lens. So this is definitely a great alternative to that. Now, I like to use the DX F-mount 35mm 1.8, but to buy that, you got to spend $200, plus you have to buy an FTZ adapter, which is no problem for people like me who have lots of F-mount lenses. But somebody coming into the system new probably won't need an FTZ adapter, and for about the price of an FTZ adapter, you can buy this lens. So I think that may be a better choice for a lot of people. So all in all, I'm going to recommend this Viltrox 33mm f1.4 lens for Nikon Z, and I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to watch this video, and as always, I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye-bye.